In the late 16th century, the world shifted on its axis. The oceans no longer separated civilizations, they connected them. Empires rose on the backs of ships, global trade networks wrapped the earth in invisible threads, and nations scrambled for wealth, dominance, and survival. But behind the glittering stories of exploration lies a darker truth. A single substance, silver, would draw continents together. And centuries later, another substance, opium, would tear one of the greatest civilizations apart. This is the story of how silver built bridges between East and West, and how opium burned those bridges down, plunging China into a century of humiliation. The flood of silver. Picture the 1500s. European ships crisscrossed the seas, returning home with treasures from Asia and the Americas. Among all the spices, silks, and precious gems, one commodity would prove most irresistible: silver. Why silver? Because China, the largest and wealthiest empire of its time, had an unquenchable thirst for it. By the mid-Qing Dynasty, China had transitioned its tax system to demand payment in silver. Farmers, merchants, and even government officials were forced to settle obligations with the metal. In effect, silver became the lifeblood of the empire's economy. Europe noticed. Spain, flush with silver from its brutal conquests in South America, saw opportunity. Mines in Potosí, high in the Andes of modern-day Bolivia, became rivers of wealth. Indigenous laborers and enslaved Africans dug the precious metal out of the earth under horrific conditions, fueling a trade network that stretched across oceans. From Acapulco, silver crossed the Pacific on Spanish galleons to Manila in the Philippines. From there, it flowed straight into China. At the same time, Portuguese and later Dutch traders ferried silver from Japan into Chinese markets. By the 17th century, China was absorbing nearly half the world's silver supply. Europe sent it east in exchange for silk, porcelain, and tea, luxuries Europeans couldn't produce themselves and quickly became addicted to. For China, this trade was a golden age. The empire's coffers swelled, artisans flourished, and Chinese goods flooded European homes. For Europe, however, the constant outflow of silver created a dangerous imbalance. The trade imbalance. By the 18th century, Britain had emerged as the new global superpower. The East India Company, a corporation with its own army, controlled huge swathes of India and was the spearhead of British ambitions in Asia. But Britain faced the same problem as Spain and Portugal before them: a massive trade deficit with China. Chinese merchants demanded silver for their goods, and they weren't interested in British wool, machinery, or trinkets. As a Qing emperor famously told King George III's emissaries, "Our celestial empire possesses all things in abundance. We have no need for your country's manufactures. In other words, bring silver, or go home." The British elite, however, had developed a taste for Chinese tea. By the late 1700s, tea drinking was no longer an aristocratic novelty, it was a national obsession. Every household wanted it. Parliament even taxed it, fueling smuggling and black market trades. So Britain desperately needed a product that China would actually buy. They found their answer in something far more destructive than silver: opium. The opium solution. Opium wasn't new to China. Small amounts had been used for centuries as medicine, mixed into remedies to dull pain or ease coughs. But smoking it recreationally was another matter entirely. The British East India Company controlled vast poppy fields in Bengal, India. By processing the flowers into opium and selling it to Chinese merchants, the company discovered it could flip the trade imbalance on its head. No longer would silver flow eastward in torrents. Now, silver would flow back to British pockets, drained from the veins of the Chinese economy. At first, the trade was technically illegal. The Qing Dynasty had banned opium imports, recognizing the danger. But corruption spread like wildfire. Local officials took bribes, smugglers thrived, and soon, addiction spread across every layer of Chinese society. By the early 1800s, millions of people were hooked. Farmers, soldiers, scholars, even officials inside the imperial court. Workforces collapsed. Families sold possessions to feed their habits. Silver reserves drained out of the empire. The irony was cruel: the very metal that had once made China rich now left it vulnerable. Resistance and collapse. The Qing emperors could no longer ignore the crisis. In 1839, the Daoguang Emperor appointed one of his most trusted officials, Lin Zexu, to eradicate the trade. Lin was incorruptible, a rare trait in a bureaucracy riddled with graft. He ordered the destruction of opium stocks in Canton, the major port where foreign merchants operated. Over 20,000 chests of opium were confiscated and publicly destroyed. Lin even wrote an open letter to Queen Victoria, appealing to her sense of morality. "We have heard that you strictly forbid opium within your own country. Why then do you allow it to be sold in China?" Victoria never replied. Instead, Britain sent warships. Thus began the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. The conflict was shockingly one-sided. China, with outdated junks and cannons, faced Britain's steam-powered gunboats and modern artillery. The Qing Navy crumbled. Coastal forts fell. British troops advanced inland almost unhindered. In 1842, China sued for peace. The resulting Treaty of Nanking was a humiliation. Hong Kong ceded to Britain. 5 treaty ports opened to British merchants. A massive indemnity paid in silver. British citizens in China granted extraterritorial rights, meaning they were exempt from Chinese law. China's sovereignty had been shattered. The second blow. If the First Opium War crippled the empire, the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, nearly destroyed it. This time, Britain had a new ally, France. Together, they launched an even more brutal campaign, burning the emperor's summer palace and forcing another round of humiliating treaties. China was forced to legalize the opium trade. Western missionaries gained access to the interior. More ports were pried open. And once again, silver bled out of the empire. The consequences were catastrophic. The Qing Dynasty faced peasant rebellions, famine, and uprisings like the Taiping Rebellion, which alone cost tens of millions of lives. By the late 19th century, China was a hollow shell of its former self, the Middle Kingdom, reduced to a victim of foreign exploitation. The Opium Legacy. Opium left scars that went far beyond addiction. It broke China's confidence. For centuries, the empire had seen itself as the center of civilization, a beacon of stability and prosperity. Now it was carved up by Western powers, its people humiliated, its rulers discredited. This period became known as the Century of Humiliation, a national trauma that shaped Chinese identity for generations. Even today, memories of the Opium Wars linger in China's political consciousness, a reminder of what happens when weakness meets exploitation. Meanwhile, Britain used the wealth and dominance it gained from opium to fuel the Industrial Revolution, expand its empire, and cement itself as the global hegemon of the 19th century. Full circle. It's tempting to view this story as inevitable. Silver flows east, opium flows west, and history plays out like a tragedy on repeat. But it was not fate. It was choice, human decisions made in boardrooms, palaces, and battlefields. Spain chose to dig silver from the bones of the Andes. Britain chose to profit from human suffering. China's rulers chose corruption and denial until it was too late. And behind those choices lay millions of ordinary lives, miners who suffocated in mountain shafts, sailors who risked typhoons on the Manila galleons, farmers who lost their fields to poppies, families torn apart by addiction. Conclusion. The story of silver and opium is not just a Chinese story. It's a global one, a tale of greed, empire, and the fragile threads that connect economies across continents. It's a reminder that wealth can build bridges, but it can also burn them. That what begins as prosperity can end in ruin. And that the most dangerous empires are not built on gold or silver, but on human suffering. The Silver Road built China's power. The Opium Road destroyed it. And in that destruction, the modern world was born.